So what do you picture when you hear the word allergy?
Right.
For most of us listening, it's probably, a few itchy hives.
Yeah, or sneezing.
Exactly, like a violent sneezing fit when the spring pollen hits, or watering eyes when you walk into a house with a cat.
Right.
We basically think of it as a nuisance,
Yeah.
just this biological overreaction that ruins a picnic.
Which, I mean, makes complete sense because that is how the vast majority of mild allergic reactions present.
Yeah.
But holding on to that image as the whole definition of an allergy is, well, it's dangerously incomplete
Dangerously incomplete.
because it completely leaves out the extreme end of the spectrum.
Right, because today we are talking about anaphylaxis.
Yeah.
And anaphylaxis it's not just a really bad allergy, it is a full body cascade.
Really is.
An event that can crash your blood pressure to lethal levels and, swell your airway shut in a matter of minutes.
I mean, it's the ultimate allergic emergency. We are looking at a scenario where an immune system that evolved over, millions of years to protect you suddenly turns against you with lethal, terrifying force.
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are going to demystify this crisis for you.
Definitely.
We've gone through the medical literature, the research, and the historical records to uncover exactly what happens under your skin.
The underlying mechanisms, yeah.
We're going to shatter some deeply dangerous medical misconceptions that even professionals fall for, and really show you how this massive reaction actually works.
Right.
Think of your body as like a complex house with intricate plumbing and wiring. Today, we're going to show you how a microscopic trigger can cause both of those vital systems to just completely short circuit.
Yeah, and to understand how that biological wiring fails today, we really have to look at how science first discovered the immune system was even capable of this.
No, this story is amazing.
Because the phenomenon wasn't discovered in a pristine hospital or like a modern lab.
Yeah.
It was discovered by total accident, basically in the middle of the ocean.
I love this story. Let's unpack it. We are going back to 1902, right?
Yep, 1902.
Aboard the massive research yacht of Prince Albert I of Monaco.
Yeah, so the prince was this passionate oceanographer, and he invited two French physiologists, Charles Richet and Paul Pourquier, onto his yacht for a specific expedition.
Okay.
They were studying the toxins of sea anemones and the Portuguese man-o'-war.
Nasty stinks.
Very. But their medical goal was actually the exact opposite of what they ended up finding.
Why? Because they were trying to create like a biological shield, weren't they? They were working on immunity.
Exactly. They were trying to find a dose of the sea anemone toxin that was small enough to safely inject into dogs.
Okay.
The hypothesis was that if the dogs survived a tiny dose, their bodies would just naturally build up a tolerance. The medical term for this is prophylaxis, so protection in advance. It's basically the fundamental principle behind vaccination, which was a massively booming field of study at the time.
So they give the dogs this tiny sublethal dose of the toxin.
Right.
And the dogs recover.
Yeah.
Everything seems to be going according to the playbook. They think they're, successfully building up this tolerance.
Right, but then comes the twist. Weeks later, Richet and Pourquier give those same dogs a second dose of the toxin.
Okay.
And keep in mind, this second dose is even smaller than the first one.
Wow.
It's an amount that would be completely harmless to a dog that had never been exposed before.
And here is where it gets incredibly dark. Because instead of being protected, instead of this prophylaxis kicking in, the dogs just collapsed.
Yeah.
They went into shock and died within minutes.
Right, because the prior exposure hadn't built a shield at all. It had built a bomb.
A biological bomb.
The first injection primed the immune system to produce a catastrophic hypersensitivity. Richet realized they had stumbled onto a completely unmapped biological phenomenon.
Wow.
He originally called it aphylaxis from the Greek, meaning without protection, and then he just tweaked it to anaphylaxis simply because it flowed better off the tongue.
Which is wildly ironic. I mean, he actually won a Nobel Prize for this in 1913.
He did, yeah.
He won the highest honor in science for completely failing to protect those dogs and instead uncovering this lethal biological trapdoor.
Exactly.
And just to place this in the broader timeline for you listening, it was a few years after this yacht expedition in 1906 that the actual term allergy was coined by Clemens von Pourquier.
Right, and anaphylaxis is essentially the absolute most extreme, dangerous expression of that allergy concept.
So let's get into the mechanics of this trap. How does the body set it and what actually springs it?
Okay.
In the literature, this is called the classical a hypersensitivity mechanism, right?
Yeah, hypersensitivity, we can break it down into a really clear sequence.
Yeah.
So step one is the setup. We call it sensitization, and it is completely silent.
Silent, meaning you don't feel it.
You feel absolutely nothing. When you are first exposed to an allergen, say a specific protein in a peanut or the venom from a bee sting, your immune system makes a crucial error.
Okay.
Instead of producing standard IgG antibodies, which are your normal defenders, it manufactures a highly specific type called IgE antibodies.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I have this straight. These IgE antibodies, they don't just float around freely in the blood, do they? They go and anchor themselves to specific immune cells.
Exactly. They attach themselves to mast cells, which are heavily concentrated in your tissues, so your skin, your airway, your gut, and also to basophils, which circulate in your blood.
Right.
The IgE antibodies anchor onto the surface of these cells and just wait. The patient feels absolutely nothing. They are now sensitized.
So they're walking around with these, like, microscopic tripwires covering their cells, totally unaware.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So what happens when they encounter that peanut protein or bee venom a second time?
That is step two, the trigger. On re-exposure, the allergen enters the body and bumps into those mast cells. The allergen binds to the IgE antibodies.
Okay.
But a single connection isn't enough. The allergen actually has to cross-link them. It has to physically bridge two or more of those IgE tripwires together.
Oh, wow.
That physical cross-linking is the activation signal.
The tripwire is officially pulled.
Yep. Within seconds, those mast cells undergo a violent process called explosive degranulation.
Explosive.
Literally explosive. The cells fuse with their own outer membranes and dump a massive payload of chemicals directly into the surrounding tissue and the bloodstream.
Wow.
Now, it's really important to understand what these chemicals are because they operate on different timelines.
Wait, because we all hear about histamine when we talk about allergies, right?
Yeah.
But what else is in that payload?
So histamine and an enzyme called tryptase are prepackaged. They are sitting in granules inside the cell, ready to launch instantly.
Okay.
That causes the immediate symptoms. But once the cell degranulates, it also starts manufacturing new, really potent chemicals on the spot, things like leukotrienes and prostaglandins.
So they're making new weapons on the fly.
Exactly. And because these have to be synthesized from scratch, they hit the system a few minutes to hours later, which escalates and prolongs the whole crisis.
So these chemicals are suddenly just flooding the system. Let's translate this into the physical symptoms the person is experiencing. This brings us back to that plumbing failure analogy we mentioned at the top of the show.
Right. So step three is the systemic effect. Histamine and its partner chemicals cause your blood vessels to rapidly dilate or widen. But they also force the cells lining your blood vessels to pull apart slightly, making the vessel walls leaky.
Leaky.
Yeah, blood plasma literally starts seeping out of your bloodstream and into your surrounding tissues.
Let's visualize this for a second. Imagine your circulatory system is a closed network of water pipes, and your heart is the pump.
Right.
If those pipes suddenly double in width and spring thousands of tiny leaks all at once, the water pressure inside the pipes is going to instantly drop to zero.
Exactly.
Your heart, the pump, is still pumping frantically, but there's no pressure left to push the blood up to your brain or your vital organs.
Right, and in medicine, that mechanism is called distributive shock.
Distributive shock.
The container holding your blood has simply become too large and too porous, so your blood pressure plummets. Meanwhile, all that fluid leaking into your tissues causes massive, rapid swelling.
Which is terrifying if it happens in the wrong place.
Very. If that swelling happens in the mucosal tissues of your throat, your airway closes.
Wow.
And to compound the emergency, those delayed chemicals we mentioned, the leukotrienes, they cause the smooth muscles surrounding your airway to violently constrict, leading to wheezing, while the smooth muscles in your gut violently cramp.
I mean, it is a total biological system override.
Cool.
But the literature shows the body doesn't always play by these textbook rules, right? The IgE tripwire makes logical sense, but we see cases that defy this logic.
Oh, absolutely.
For example, why does one person get stung by a bee and just feel awful, while another person gets stung by the exact same type of bee and goes into fatal shock?
Yeah, that severity mystery puzzled immunologists for decades. But in 2008, a landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine by Dr. Vedas and his colleagues finally provided a biochemical answer.
Okay.
They looked at a specific chemical mediator produced during anaphylaxis called PAF platelet activating factor.
Okay, so how does PAF explain the difference between life and death?
Well, the researchers measured PAF levels, and crucially, they measured the enzyme our bodies naturally use to break PAF.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they compared patients who had died from anaphylaxis against those who survived. And the fatal cases didn't just have significantly higher levels of the lethal PAF chemical.
They also lacked the enzyme.
Exactly. They had abnormally low levels of the enzyme required to clear it out.
So their bodies were pumping out way more of this destructive chemical, and they completely lacked the biological broom needed to sweep it away.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Ah.
It provided hard evidence that severity isn't just about how much allergen you're exposed to. It is heavily dictated by your individual internal biochemical cleanup crew.
That answers the severity question beautifully.
Yeah.
But let's talk about timing. You said this cascade happens in seconds or minutes once the tripwire is pulled.
Usually, yes.
But there's a famous allergy that completely shatters that timeline.
Oh, you're talking about alpha-gal syndrome.
Yes.
Yeah, this phenomenon was painstakingly pieced together by researchers at the University of Virginia between 2007 and 2009.
This is the one triggered by a tick, right?
It is. It starts with a bite from the Lone Star tick. The tick's saliva somehow tricks the human immune system into developing those IgE antibodies against a specific sugar molecule called alpha-gal.
Okay.
And that sugar is found abundantly in the meat of mammals, so beef, pork, lamb, venison. But the bizarre twist is the presentation. If someone with a severe peanut allergy eats a peanut, they react before they even swallow.
Right, it's instant.
But if someone with alpha-gal eats a hamburger, nothing happens. The anaphylaxis typically strikes 3 to 6 hours later.
I have to pause you there, because if I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, how is that biologically possible?
It's wild, I know.
If the tripwires are in the gut and you chew and swallow the allergen, how can it possibly hide in the body for 6 hours before triggering a reaction?
Right, well, it baffled doctors for years, and it's why so many cases were missed. The delay happens because the alpha-gal sugar molecule isn't a protein. It's heavily bound up in the animal fat.
Oh, and the fat.
Yeah. And human digestion of fat is a notoriously slow, complex process. It takes hours for your digestive system to break down those lipid structures, package them, and finally release the alpha-gal molecules into the bloodstream where they can actually physically reach and cross-link those IgE tripwires on the mast cells.
That is fascinating. The bomb is swallowed, but the timer doesn't start until the stomach dismantles the casing.
Exactly.
And this systemic shock doesn't just mess with your blood pressure and your breathing either.
Right.
It can actually attack the heart itself, right?
Yeah, this is known as Kunis syndrome, first described in the medical literature back in 1991. We typically think of allergies and heart attacks as two entirely separate emergencies.
Yeah, completely unrelated.
But mast cells don't just live in your skin and gut, they also reside directly within the tissue of your heart and around your coronary arteries.
Wait, so when a massive allergic reaction triggers mast cells everywhere to degranulate, the ones in the heart explode too?
Yes. And when they dump their payload of histamine and leukotrienes locally into the heart tissue, it can cause the coronary arteries to aggressively spasm.
Wow.
Those spasms cut off blood flow to the heart muscle, literally inducing a heart attack as a direct result of the allergic event.
So because anaphylaxis can present in these incredibly bizarre, rule-breaking ways like a delayed reaction to a steak or a sudden heart attack, medical professionals frequently miss the diagnosis.
They do.
We fall into these well-documented diagnostic traps, and perhaps the most dangerous one is the hives myth.
Yes. So back in 2005 and 2006, major allergy and infectious disease organizations convened to create universal consensus criteria for diagnosing anaphylaxis in the emergency room.
Okay.
They had to do this because you cannot wait for blood work or an allergy test when a patient's airway is actively closing.
No, you have to act fast.
Right, you have to diagnose it clinically right on the spot.
So what did the consensus reveal that was being missed?
Well, it highlighted a wildly counterintuitive statistic. Up to 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 patients in full anaphylactic shock present with absolutely zero hives and zero skin rash.
Think about the implications of that for a second.
It's huge.
Even highly trained nurses and paramedics are often taught, anecdotally, to look for a rash to confirm an allergic reaction.
Right.
If up to 20% of people whose blood pressure is fatally crashing don't have a single hive on their body, that is a terrifying misconception. If a responder is hesitating, waiting for a rash to appear before using an EpiPen, the patient could die.
It is a lethal hesitation. And another diagnostic trap is assuming the patient must have been exposed to a trigger before.
Right, the whole sensitization thing.
Yeah, we spent all that time discussing sensitization step 1, building the tripwires, but there is a whole category known as non-immunologic anaphylaxis.
This is where the body just skips step 1 entirely.
Completely skips it. Certain substances like radio contrast dye used in CT scans, specific opioid medications, or even common NSAID pain relievers, they have the chemical ability to directly agitate the mast cells.
Without the IgE tripwires.
Exactly. They don't need IgE antibodies at all. They physically force the mast cell to degranulate on a person's very first exposure in their lifetime.
Wow.
And clinically, it looks and behaves identically to classic anaphylaxis.
I mean, if I'm listening to this, the scariest category has to be the cases where there is no known trigger at all. You're telling me a person's body can just drop into fatal shock on a random Tuesday for absolutely no reason.
It's scary, I know.
How common is idiopathic anaphylaxis?
True idiopathic anaphylaxis is rare, but it is terrifying. However, there is a major shift happening in how immunology views these cases.
No.
Yeah, many experts now argue that a significant portion of these idiopathic events are actually undiagnosed mast cell disorders, such as mast cell activation syndrome or MCS.
Okay, MCS.
In these patients, the mast cells themselves are structurally hyperactive.
So the trigger isn't missing, the threshold for the explosion is just incredibly low.
Exactly. The mast cells are so unstable that even minor physiological shifts, extreme stress, sudden temperature changes, or microscopic amounts of a trigger can cause spontaneous degranulation.
Okay, so once this trap is sprung, whether it is from a peanut, a tick bite, or a hyperactive mast cell, how do we fix it?
Right, the treatment.
This leads us to the behavioral side of the crisis. And what the research shows is a tragic human error: epinephrine hesitancy.
Yeah, when anaphylaxis begins, the medical guidelines worldwide are completely unanimous. Intramuscular epinephrine, which is synthetic adrenaline, is the only first-line life-saving treatment.
The only one.
But the data shows over and over again that patients, parents, and even some clinicians reach for an antihistamine pill first.
Oh, man.
Or they delay using the auto-injector because they're terrified of the needle, or they convince themselves they might be overreacting.
Let's break down the biology of why reaching for an antihistamine in this moment is the wrong choice.
Well, an antihistamine does exactly what it says. It blocks histamine receptors. But taking an antihistamine during anaphylaxis is like disabling the smoke detector while the house is actively burning down.
Wow, okay.
It will stop the itching and clear up the hives. Basically, it turns off the alarm bells, but it does absolutely nothing to put out the fire. Antihistamines cannot reverse the massive drop in blood pressure, and they cannot relax the smooth muscles constricting the airway.
But epinephrine does. How does adrenaline actually fix the plumbing failure?
Epinephrine binds to entirely different receptors in the body. It forces the dilated, leaky blood vessels to aggressively clamp back down, instantly restoring blood pressure.
Nice.
Simultaneously, it forces the smooth muscles around the lungs to relax, opening the airway back up. It actively reverses the biological cascade.
Okay, so you recognize the crisis, you administer the epinephrine, the blood vessels tighten, and the patient can breathe again.
Right.
Can they just go home?
No. And this is the final agonizing trap of anaphylaxis: the biphasic threat.
Biphasic.
In a meaningful percentage of cases, a patient's symptoms will completely resolve after epinephrine. They feel fine. And then hours later, the anaphylaxis returns in full force.
Wait, if the allergen is gone and the epinephrine worked, why did the bomb go off a second time?
It comes back to those delayed chemicals we discussed earlier. The initial explosion releases histamine, but the mast cell also triggers a secondary wave of immune cells, like eosinophils and neutrophils, to migrate into the tissues over the next several hours.
Oh, I see.
When that secondary wave arrives, they release their own massive cascade of inflammation. This usually happens within 8 to 10 hours, but the window can stretch from 1 to 72 hours.
So the emergency room observation period isn't just a precaution.
Not at all.
It is a biological necessity because a second wave of immune troops is literally marching toward the tissue.
Exactly. Patients have been sent home feeling cured, only to experience a biphasic reaction and die in their sleep.
That is just tragic. You know, overcoming all these traps, the bizarre timing, the invisible triggers, the human hesitation, it has forced society to fundamentally adapt.
It really has.
We have had to pull the management of anaphylaxis out of the hospital and integrate it into everyday life, you know, into our schools, our restaurants, our laws.
Yeah,
And sometimes that adaptation only happens after a terrible tragedy.
very true. In 2016, a 15-year-old British teenager named Natasha Ednan Laperouse bought a baguette at a manger shop in the airport before a flight.
Okay.
She was highly allergic to sesame. She carefully checked the ingredient label on the wrapper, saw no mention of sesame, and ate it. She suffered fatal anaphylaxis on the plane.
Because the sesame seeds weren't sprinkled on top, they were baked directly into the dough.
There. Exactly. And under UK law at the time, because the sandwich was made and packaged on-site in that specific shop, the company was not legally required to provide full ingredient labeling.
That's unbelievable.
Her death sparked an outrage that forced a massive legislative reckoning. It led directly to Natasha's law, enacted in 2021, which strictly mandates full ingredient labeling on all prepackaged food for direct sale.
So a single case of anaphylaxis rewrote national food safety laws.
It did.
It is a devastating story, but it just shows how serious the threat is. And the primary weapon we use to fight that threat, the autoinjector, has a fascinating, entirely non-medical origin story.
Yeah, the EpiPen autoinjector technology was actually adapted in the 1970s by an engineer named Sheldon Kaplan.
Okay.
But he wasn't trying to cure allergies, he was working for the military. He designed the autoinjector to deliver nerve agent antidotes to soldiers on the battlefield.
No, wow. That perfectly explains the aggressive design, though.
Right.
It had to be thrust through a heavy military uniform under the extreme stress of a chemical attack by a soldier whose fine motor skills were completely shot by panic.
Exactly. It was engineered to require gross motor function, just a firm grip and a hard shove against the thigh. A spring-loaded mechanism does the rest, deploying the needle and the drug instantly.
It is wild to think about. This piece of Cold War battlefield survival technology is now tucked into the backpacks of millions of elementary school children because of rising food allergy rates.
It's crazy when you frame it like that.
We've literally armed civilians with military tech to fight their own hyperactive immune systems.
Yeah, and because anaphylaxis is such a dramatic, terrifying event, the sheer fear of it can sometimes completely warp public perception.
Oh, for sure.
We saw this unfold on a global scale during the initial rollout of the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines in late 2020.
Oh, I remember the headlines. A few healthcare workers had severe allergic reactions right out of the gate, and panic just immediately spread.
Right. The suspected trigger was an inactive lipid ingredient called PEG, or polyethylene glycol, which was used to package the mRNA.
Okay.
But when post-marketing surveillance eventually crunched the massive data sets, the true rate of anaphylaxis was roughly a handful of cases per million doses.
Wow, so it was exceptionally rare.
Very rare. But the primal fear of your throat closing shut, of that sudden systemic shock, is so deeply ingrained in us that it dominated the narrative out of all proportion to the statistical risk.
It really proves the psychological grip this condition has on our society. So let's do a rapid-fire recap for everyone listening just to lock in the core mechanics of what we've covered today.
Sounds good.
Number 1, anaphylaxis is a system-wide shock, a catastrophic plumbing and wiring failure caused by leaky blood vessels. It is not just a severe rash.
Right.
Number 2, epinephrine is the only immediate defense because it physically tightens those blood vessels back up.
Yeah.
Taking an antihistamine is just turning off the smoke alarm.
Exactly.
Number 3, you do not always need a prior exposure to be in danger, and up to 20% of people never get a rash.
Yep.
And lastly, this entire lethal mechanism was discovered by complete accident on a royal yacht by scientists trying to do the exact opposite.
Which highlights beautifully how complex, fragile, and just utterly counterintuitive human immunology can be.
It really does. But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Think back to Richet and Portier on that yacht in 1902.
Okay.
They were originally trying to induce tolerance in those dogs. They were trying to build a shield. Now that modern science understands exactly how these IgE tripwires work, how they anchor to the mast cells, and how they cross-link,
Yeah.
could medicine eventually find a way to hack this system in reverse?
Oh, that's the dream.
Imagine a future where, instead of just carrying an auto-injector to treat the explosion, we could deploy a therapy that permanently tells these hyper-alert immune cells to stand down, dissolving the tripwires and disarming the anaphylactic bomb before the timer ever starts.
Finding a way to permanently induce that tolerance is, it's really the absolute holy grail of modern allergy immunology.
It is incredible to imagine a world without this biological trap. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking beneath the surface, and we will catch you next time.